There are places where history announces itself the moment you arrive. Like Gettysburg, Pearl Harbor, Love Canal. You step under the ground already knowing that something terrible happened there. And then there are places like Ottawa, Illinois, a beautiful river town about 80 miles southwest of Chicago. There's historic buildings, tree-lined neighborhoods, a downtown that looks like the kind of place where life moves a little bit slower and people still recognize each other at the grocery store. Drive through Ottawa today, and you could spend an entire afternoon there without even realizing that parts of this community were once contaminated with radioactive waste. You could walk across ordinary ground without knowing that the federal government spent decades removing polluted soil from properties scattered throughout the town. You could pass the former locations of two companies that produce glow-in-the-dark clock and watch dials using radium-based paint. And you might never hear the name of the dying woman who has carried into a legal hearing, placed before the company that poisoned her and asked to prove that the bones collapsing inside her body were connected to the job she once considered a blessing. You know what her name was? Katherine Donahue. And by the summer of 1938, she was 35 years old. Her teeth were gone. Her jaw had deteriorated. She could barely move. Her body had been reduced to only 70 pounds. She had become so weak that parts of her testimony had to be taken from her home. But Katherine was alive, and the company desperately needed time, because time was the one thing Katherine no longer had. What do you think of that one, Meg?
That sounds not pleasant.
No, not pleasant at all. We have been doing schools and weird explosions and, catastrophes and stuff like that. And I said, we got to mix it up. But it is the Yore Town podcast where we do small towns, big stories, and hopefully stories you've probably never heard of, because, there was people that had no idea what Bath, Michigan was, where it was, and that crazy story. And this one's wild as well. Ottawa, Illinois. Didn't even know it was a place. I knew Ottawa, Canada, but I didn't know Illinois. What do you think came first, Meg? Ottawa, Illinois, or Ottawa, Canada? Tough one, huh?
I'm going Canada.
That's what my gut said. Let's see here. What came first, Ottawa, Canada, or Ottawa, Illinois? Let's see. According to my phone, Ottawa, Illinois came first as a designated town named Ottawa, having been laid out in 1830. Because Ottawa itself was originally named Bytown before it was renamed Ottawa in 1855.
In Canada?
Yep. Look at that. Educational. All right, so you ready to get into this?
I am ready.
All right, here we go. So I feel like, as always, to kind of understand a quiet Illinois town, we gotta talk. We gotta go back in time. All right, because when radium was not as feared, okay, it was actually celebrated at one point. We have to go back to the years when something glowing in the darkness, it didn't look like a warning, it looked like the future. And it's probably weird for us to think about that now, isn't it? I think people kid around when you would see the episodes of Simpsons, and there'd be that radium rod or whatever, glow in the dark, and it would go from like Homer's back pocket, jump around town. Bart would hit it with the skateboard.
Yeah.
But that was the future, right?
Right.
Until it was killing people. But a lot of these stories, we're kind of giving you the backstory. Who would have thought last week, you know what I mean? When in the episode that we did that's the reason why you can smell gas, because something bad happened. So,
what year is this?
This is the 1930s is when the trial happened. So you're talking probably 1910s, 1920s. The beginning of the 20th century, so 1900s. At that point, America was changing at a speed ordinary people had never experienced before. You were starting to see electric lights in cities and towns. Automobiles were appearing on roads that were built for horses. Airplanes had actually gone from impossible to instruments of war. Factories, they could actually produce goods faster than ever. Science seemed capable of solving almost anything at this point. And a few discoveries captured the imagination of the public, and one of them was radium. Marie and Pierre Curie had identified the new element at the end of the 19th century. It produced energy. It generated heat. Compounds containing it could create an eerie glow. Because the dangers of long-term internal exposure were not broadly understood by the public yet, radium became surrounded by claims that range from hopeful to completely absurd. It appeared in medical treatments. I mean, there's been some wild medical treatments back in the day, right?
Right.
Alcohol, things that are deemed drugs now in our country. In radium, which I guess technically they use some form of radiation to treat things.
Yep.
Anyways, there was companies that were actually advertising radioactive health products. Think about that for a minute. Guess what else was sold? Radium water was sold as a tonic.
Yikes.
Can I order the radium with a little whiskey, please?
Oh, my.
Manufacturers, they put radioactive claims on cosmetics, creams, and other products that promised youth, strength, and renewed energy. The word radium, it actually became a sales pitch. It meant scientific, it meant modern, powerful. That enthusiasm collided with a genuine practical need during the First World War. Soldiers, they needed watches that they could actually read at night. Pilots needed instrument panels visible in dark cockpits. Military crews needed gauges that, could be seen without lighting a lamp and, giving away their position. So the solution was luminous paint. A small amount of radium could activate another material in the mixture and create, numbers and markings that glowed in the dark without being charged beneath a light first, like our typical glow in the dark. You got to charge it with a light first.
Right.
But these soldiers needed something, right? So they came up with this great idea. Demand grew rapidly. And after the war, glowing watches and clocks remained popular with civilians. I mean, imagine back in the 1900s, you had a glowing clock in your house. It's pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm.
So, what were you going to say?
I was going to say I would have felt cool.
I mean, I still kind of would feel cool. But the war, it helped create an industry. The industry eventually came to, guess where, Meg? Ottawa, Illinois. Yeah, full circle right there.
Dun, dun, dun.
There it is. The Dun Dun Queen strikes again for the first time in a hot minute.
Been a while.
It's been a while. So the Radium Dial Company began operating in Illinois before moving its dial painting work to Ottawa in the early 1920s, closer to one of its major customers, the West Clocks Clock Company. Whew, say that 5 times fast. The West Clocks Clock Company in nearby Peru. Ottawa, it was an industrial town. A dependable employer mattered. A factory meant wages flowing into local stores, homes, families. For young women, the dial painting jobs were pretty attractive jobs, Many other jobs available to women, they were exhausting. They were dirty. They were poorly paid or performed under the constant supervision of families employing them as domestic workers. So dial painting appeared different. It was skilled work. It required patience and a steady hand. Seems like a good job for a woman back then, right?
Yep.
So the painters, they sat at tables and they applied tiny little numbers and markings to clocks, watches, and instrument faces. Could you see yourself doing something like that if you were in the 1900s?
Probably.
Yeah, you'd be a little number painter?
Probably.
Some of these workers, though, they were teenagers. Others were young women beginning their adult lives. But they were daughters, they were sisters, they were friends, they were wives, and eventually they were mothers. They weren't scientists. They were not radiation experts. They were employees, following the procedure taught to them by the people that had every reason to trust, right? Procedure was pretty simple. The brushes used for the delicate work, they lost their sharp point pretty quickly. I mean, you're dealing with some radium, I could imagine. So the painters, guess what they were instructed to do? They had to draw the brush between their lips, creating a fine tip. So then they dipped it into the luminous paint, then the painter's dial, then their lip. So it's lip, dip, paint.
Knew that was coming.
What? The phrase? Lip, dip, paint?
No, like putting it
The
in
bed.
their lips.
Yeah. So the phrase makes the work sound almost playful, right?
Mm.
Lip, dip, paint. Lip, dip, paint. But think about the procedure and what it actually meant. I mean, every time the brush touched a painter's mouth, a tiny amount of radioactive material was probably entering the body. Not enough to produce an immediate reaction, not enough to make that employee feel sick before lunch, not enough to send the factory into a full-blown panic. Just a microscopic amount. Then another. Then another. Again and again throughout a shift, day after day, week after week. Some women perform the motion thousands of times. Unfortunately, the danger did not announce itself. There was no chemical burn. There was no bad taste that forced them to stop. There was no cloud of smoke above the factory, no siren across Ottawa. The disaster entered quietly, one brush stroke at a time. Whew. Don't like that.
Mm-mm.
But the workers have sometimes been described as though they behaved foolishly around a substance that was obviously dangerous. That interpretation misses the entire point because radium did not carry the meaning that it carries today. The women, they were reassured. The method was taught as part of the job. Fine particles could cling to workers and their clothing, making them almost shimmer in the darkness. I mean, other than the radioactive part, kind of cool.
Mm.
Some painters, they reportedly used the paint decoratively or enjoyed the glow that it left behind. I feel like you would have in the 1910s if that's your job. You would have loved that glow, right?
Right?
I mean, it's not danger at this point.
Draw a little heart on your cheek.
Yeah, draw a little heart on your cheek. But there was not proof that they were reckless. It was proof of how safe they believed it to be. I mean, imagine being told every day that you work with a modern miracle. Imagine seeing products containing the same celebrated element marketed to the public. Imagine watching supervisors permit the procedure. Imagine needing the paycheck. Why would you assume that everyone around you was wrong? You wouldn't, right? And then there is another reason the danger remained hidden. Radium behaves chemically in a way that the human body can mistake it for calcium. That's scary.
Interesting.
Yeah, so when you swallow it, it pretty much can be deposited right into your bones. And once it's there, the radiation doesn't attack the body from the outside. The source is inside. So the skeleton becomes the place where the material is then stored. The exposure continues while they sleep, right? While they eat dinner, while they walk through Ottawa, while she gets married, while they have kids, while she tries to understand why her body is starting to fail her. The radium isotope most closely associated with this history is radium-226. Guess how long of a half-life it has? Take a rough guess. It's a big number. Years. Give me years.
23.
23 years. Close. 1,600 years. It has a half-life.
Oh.
Half-life. What? Right? Don't worry. They're just lip, dip, and go or whatever.
I was close.
You're pretty close.
Just around the corner.
Just around the corner. So it doesn't mean a worker needed to live for centuries to be harmed, right? It means the substance did not simply wear out and disappear after the shift ended. The worker would go home, but the radium stayed. At first, everything looked successful. The factory produced. The clocks, they glowed. The workers earned the money. Ottawa benefited from the industry. Then women began experiencing pain, Meg. It started with maybe a little dental trouble that seemed a little ordinary at the times, right? You had a little toothache. There was some swelling. Ugh, my tooth is a little loose. I'm going to take the tooth out. But the wounds, they didn't always heal as they should because there was always pain. Then more teeth were loosening. In severe cases, bone in the jaw started to deteriorate. The condition later became infamous as a radium jaw. Ugh.
Yeah, that's unsettling.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase, it almost sounds clinical until you stop and picture it, right?
Mm-hmm.
A young woman visits a dentist expecting relief from a bad tooth, so they remove it. But the wound was still open. Then infection spread. Then the surrounding bone weakens, pieces of the jaws, they deteriorated, the face changes, eating is painful, speaking's tough. and no one around you can explain what's going on. Some of the workers suffered from anemia, fractures, tumors, severe pain, and other effects associated with internal radium exposure. But in the beginning, the illnesses, they did not arrive with a single obvious pattern that was just stamped across every single person. Because one woman became sick before another. The symptoms, they were different. Years could pass between exposure and devastating disease. That delay, I guess, protected the company, right?
Made it hard to trace, yeah.
Yeah. It didn't protect the women, though, did it?
I
mean, just imagine arriving for work and seeing an empty chair beside you. Your friend is sick. Then another coworker's sick. Then they disappear. Then there's another. Then another. Then rumors begin moving through the factory and around town. One woman having some dental problems. Another can barely walk. Another has died. So the questions become impossible to ignore, but questions are not the same as proof, right? And in a company town, accusing an employer of poisoning workers, that would probably divide a community. Factories, they did more than create products. They created paychecks. They supported the stores. They helped families survive. So when a company became part of a town's economy, challenging that company could be interpreted as challenging the town itself, huh? So the sick women, they were not beginning a fight from a position of power. They were employees facing an industry with lawyers, scientific advisors, and resources. They were also confronting something even larger, the uncertainty of a medical world that was still learning what internal radiation could potentially do. But there was a question that should have been devastatingly simple. How did the professionals who understood radium handle it? Right? I mean, how would you think in the 1900s, the professionals that have this radium, how do you think they're handling it? You think they're lip dipping and brushing?
No.
Right?
I think they know.
I mean, because you got these painters that were instructed to shape brushes with their mouths. Scientists and chemists who work closely with radioactive materials, they were far more likely to use precautions.
Hazmat suits.
Yeah. I mean, that contrast, it definitely matters. The women were not given the same protection as the people in a better position to understand the risk. Once researchers began connecting the illnesses of dial painters to radium, ignorance became pretty hard to claim. In New Jersey, there was a pathologist, Harrison Martland, who investigated the deaths and illnesses of dial painters and helped demonstrate that radium deposited in their bodies was the reason they were sick. The science was beginning to catch up. It was becoming possible to show that the women were not imagining their symptoms. They were not simply unhealthy. They were not all suffering unrelated tragedies. Their bones contained the evidence. But Ottawa's women still had to make the system listen. And this is where Katherine Donahue enters the story, Meg. You ready for old Katherine?
I am.
All right, so Katherine began working for the Radium Dial Company in Ottawa as a very young woman. She was Catherine Wolfe until she married Tom Donahue. They had kids. She had the kind of future many of the painters imagined while kind of sitting at their tables, licking radium. A husband, a home, a family, an ordinary life. But her body began kind of betraying her. She developed pain at first, then a limp. Her condition became visible enough that people started to talk a little bit. Katherine later said the company, they dismissed her in 1931 because her limping was causing too much discussion. Imagine that. You got fired because your limp had people talking too much. I mean, read that again.
That's horrible.
She wasn't fired because she had intentionally done something wrong. She said she was fired because the physical evidence of what had happened to her was creating questions. Her illness had become bad for business. Katherine continued to decline. Her teeth were lost, Meg. Her jaw deteriorated. Her bones weakened. And unfortunately, a tumor developed. By the late 1930s, Katherine was dying. Yet, she wasn't alone, because other Ottawa painters, including women such as Charlotte Purcell, Pearl Payne, and others, were also seeking accountability. They needed legal representation. They needed someone willing to take on the company. Guess what, Meg? A lot of attorneys were unwilling. Occupational illness cases were tough to win. The exposures had happened years earlier. The company could argue that legal deadlines had expired. It could challenge the cause of each woman's death. It could delay. And delay was not a neutral strategy when the plaintiffs were dying. Every postponed hearing increased the possibility that another woman would be gone before a final decision arrived. But eventually, a Chicago attorney, Leonard Grossman, agreed to represent the women for free. The case went before the Illinois Industrial Commission. By that point, Katherine was so ill that participating in her own case became quite the physical ordeal. Newspapers, they described her as one of the so-called living dead. It was a cruel phrase, yes, but it captured the shocking condition of a woman still conscious and fighting while her body was pretty much collapsing. April 1938, Katherine appeared for testimony. She was rough. She had difficulty moving. She had difficulty speaking. During the proceedings, she actually collapsed. The hearing eventually continued at her home because she was too weak to travel. I mean, picture that room. A dying mother, her husband and family nearby, lawyers and officials, they're all gathered around. The legal system had not moved quickly enough to meet Katherine while she was strong. So the legal system had to come to her deathbed.
Sad.
It's terrible. So while she was there, she had to describe the work. She described the brush. She demonstrated the motion that had been repeated so casually inside that factory. Lip, dip, paint. The company fought the claims. It challenged whether the illnesses could legally be compensated after so much time had passed. It appealed unfavorable decisions. But in 1938, Katherine and the other Ottawa woman, they won, Meg. The Illinois Industrial Commission upheld compensation for the dial painters. But the victory mattered more than money, didn't it? Because there was no amount of money that was going to give Katherine her health back. There was no award that was going to give her jaw back or her teeth, and no check could replace the years that were stolen from her and her time with her kids and family. The case mattered because it recognized that a disease appearing slowly could actually be caused by a workplace. An employer could not necessarily escape responsibility simply because the injury took years to reveal itself. That principle was pretty crucial. A machine accident happens in an instant. You know, a hand's caught, a structure collapses. The connection between work and injury, it's pretty obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Occupational disease is quite different because the worker can leave the factory and feel fine. She became, very sick later. Mm-hmm. By then, maybe the records were lost. Managers were gone and different. The company may claim the cause is unknowable. Katherine, though, and the Ottawa painters, they helped force the law to confront that delay. They helped establish the invisible harm was still harm. Company appealed. Katherine lived long enough to learn that its first appeal before the commission had been denied. She died. Whoa, this is creepy. July 27th, 1938. The day this comes out, almost 100 years. I'm not doing the math.
Close to
80-something years. To the day, that's kind of creepy. I didn't know that. But she was only 35 years old. The day before her death, the company's attorneys had filed another appeal. I mean, that timing tells you almost everything. Katherine had spent years waiting for the system to recognize, what happened. Even as she lied dying, the company was still asking for the system for more. She died, the case continued, the other women continued, and the company ultimately failed to erase their victory. But this is not where Ottawa's story ends. Honestly, this is where it becomes even harder to believe, because you might assume that once workers were sick, the science was becoming clear, and the legal fight had, exposed the industry. Radium dial production in Ottawa stopped, right?
I'm going to think no because of the buildup.
It didn't. You're right. You're always right. Joseph Kelly, can't trust a man with two first names, had been president of the Radium Dial Company. After leaving the company, he established a separate business in Ottawa called Luminous Processes. It operated only a few blocks from Radium Dial. Think about it. The problem was not moved to a distant state. He didn't say, hey, we're packing up in Illinois and going over to Maine. It was not buried beneath a different industry. A new company producing luminous dials operated in the same community where women connected to the earlier factory were becoming sick and dying. Because Radium Dial ceased operation in the 30s, but luminous process continued until 1978.
Wow.
For decades, long after Katherine passed, long after the public had learned the term Radium Girls, long after Hiroshima and Nagasaki transformed the world's understanding of atomic danger, long after Americans had begun building bomb shelters and fearing radioactive fallout, the luminous dial industry remained part of Ottawa. The lip pointing method was eventually abandoned, reducing the workers' ingestion of the paint. But stopping that one procedure, it just didn't make radioactive materials ordinary. Production still created waste, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Buildings and equipment, they would become contaminated. Workers could carry particles on clothing, and the physical legacy did not disappear when the factories closed. I mean, that's the point. When this stops being only the story of workers inside a factory, it becomes the story of the entire town, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the original radium dial buildings were demolished in 1968. The luminous processes structured were demolished later during the 80s. Waste and demolition material connected the plants. Well, they ended up in just fill that was scattered around Ottawa. Contamination, it didn't remain neatly sealed behind like one little locked gate. It was across multiple areas of the city, on ordinary properties, near homes, beneath ground where people lived their lives without seeing anything unusual. Radiation is uniquely frightening because the land can look completely normal. I mean, there could be green grass, flowers, a driveway, a kid's bike. Nothing in the appearance of the soil tells a family that it's pretty not good under there. You actually need instruments, measurements, investigations. Imagine buying a home in Ottawa decades after Katherine died. You know nothing about dial painting. You never worked for Radium Dial or luminous processes. So you plant a garden. Your kids are playing outside. Maybe they drink from the hose. Then investigators arrive with radiation detection equipment. The machine responds to the ground right beneath your property. Suddenly, a decision made by a factory generations earlier is now inside your life. Whew. That's tough, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the United States Environmental Protection Agency eventually identified what became known as the Ottawa Radiation Areas Superfund site. It's weird that Superfund. It almost sounds like super fun.
That's what I thought you said. I was going to ask you.
No Superfund. Superfund. It was not one single fenced-off parcel. It consisted of 16 areas scattered around the city. The EPA traced contamination to radioactive waste, polluted soil, and demolition debris associated with the Radium Dial Company and the luminous processes. Ottawa's industrial success had left a radioactive footprint, and cleaning it would take decades. Because remember the shelf life on that, Meg?
Way more than I thought.
Do you remember?
60,000?
16,000 years. That's a lot. That's crazy. But I don't know. Should we wrap this up?
Yeah.
Let's wrap this up.
But, real quick.
Oh, real quick.
I looked it up. There is a series about this.
Ooh. Give him a shout out.
On Netflix.
Ooh, Netflix.
Called Radium Girls, I believe.
Radium Girls? Yeah, that's kind of what the term became known for these.
Yeah, Radium Girls.
Radium Girls.
Came out in 2018.
All right. Well, we'll have to check it out, huh? Radium Girls on Netflix.
But I think it's a different place.
Oh. Interesting.
This one says it's about dial painters in Orange, New Jersey.
Oh, I had to imagine, there was dial. Probably everywhere.
All over the place.
Mm-hmm. I just found Ottawa, Illinois, kind of hit because Ottawa, Canada is only 45 minutes from home, small town. Just,
probably a similar storyline, I'm going to guess.
Ugh. Lip, dip.
It says that in the description.
It's crazy. Well, today, though, Meg, with everything that happened, the cleanups and this and that, Ottawa's alive. The Illinois River, it continues past the city. People eat downtown, families gather, new businesses occupy old buildings. Most people passing through would never mistake it for the site of a slow-moving radioactive disaster. And this is exactly why I feel it belongs on the Yore Town podcast, right? Because history doesn't always have to leave behind ruins. Sometimes it leaves a beautiful town. Sometimes the building is demolished, but the company disappears. The victims, unfortunately, they're buried. Grass grows over contaminated soil. And unless somebody tells you where to look, the past becomes invisible again. Ottawa's story began with a promise, a new industry, good wages, modern technology, paint that made darkness disappear. And for a while, it must have felt like the future had chosen Ottawa. Then the women became sick. The company challenged them. Katherine fought while her body collapsed. Another luminous dial operation continued in town for decades. Radioactive contamination spread across multiple properties, and nearly a century after Katherine's death, federal crews were still working through the final stages of cleanup. This is not a simple tragedy. It's a warning about what happens when excitement moves faster than the old understanding, when production matters more than precaution, when workers are expected to trust information they're not allowed to question, when companies treat uncertainty as permission, and when a town is left to carry consequences long after the people who created them are gone. The most frightening part of the story, in my opinion, is not that the workers ignored an obvious danger, because they didn't. The most frightening part is that they did exactly what workers were asked to do every single day. They arrived on time. They learned the process. They trusted the training. They tried to work quickly. They followed the instructions. Lip, dip, paint. 3 ordinary words, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all it took. There was no explosion, no siren, no moment when everyone ran for the exit. Just a young woman seated at a table in Ottawa, bringing a brush to her lips because the person in charge told her that was how the job was done. And doing it again and again and again and again until the workday ended, until the factory closed, until her body began to break, until the company could no longer pretend not to see her. And Katherine Donahue was dying when she was forced at the company, when she was forced to say, hey, company, take a look at me, when she was forced out of her job because she had a limp. And she could not recover what had been taken, but she could leave behind the truth. The brush wasn't harmless. The sickness was not coincidence. The woman and the women, they were not disposable, right? And a company could not wait for its workers to die and assume the story would die with them. Ottawa's proof that stories can outlive corporations, that evidence can survive denial, that a dying woman can change the rules for people she'll never meet, and that the ground beneath an ordinary town can remember what everyone else tried to forget. The clocks, they glowed because the paint released energy no one in the room could see, but the women suffered for the same reason. Invisible energy, invisible damage, invisible until it was too late. But Katherine, she sure made it visible. The other Ottawa painters, they sure made it visible. And now, generations later, the least we can do is keep looking. I'm Matt, and that's Meg, and this is the Yore Town podcast. The strange, dark, and unbelievable true stories of real places. What do you think of that, Meg?
So that's a line.
That's crazy. That is crazy. Well, just remember, forgotten places only stay forgotten until somebody tells the story. I'll tell another story next week, Meg.
You got it.
All right. We'll be back next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.